Continuing on our journey through the pre-Inca cultures, we are flying over the mysterious Pampa del Ingenio. The first person to fly over this land was the American scientist Paul Kosok in 1939. He discovered enigmatic lines stretching out into the distance and pointing towards where the sun sets. This could not be a natural phenomenon. These lines must have been drawn and etched into the Pampa by the hand of man. He believed it to be the largest book of astronomy in the world. And there were not just lines, but also enormous drawings which could only be seen from the air and at a considerable height. The German mathematician Maria Reiche continued the investigations. She spent 40 years of her life studying the lines and drawings. In effect, many of them coincided with solar solstices and the exact place where the moon rises. But according to this investigator, these lines across the Pampas were made during the first millennium of our era by the Nazca and Paraca peoples. In her studies, she makes the following observation. How and why were they made by a supposedly primitive culture who could not fly? They must have first planned and drawn them on a smaller scale. But how they were able to place them precisely and in the right direction remains a mystery, which will take many years to solve. We have before us one of the most important tasks in the study of our history, which will help us understand the peoples of the past and their way of thinking. The fragile lines have been conserved due to the almost total lack of rainfall. But there are parts where car tracks have destroyed them, and the Pan-American Highway cuts right across this plain. The collection of over 16,000 skulls in the Archaeological Museum in Lima makes it possible to study the pathology of these ancient cultures. These Paraca and Nazca skulls were subjected to a traumatic deformation, apparently simply for aesthetic reasons. For a long, thin skull was a symbol of the upper class. The deformations were achieved by means of two splints, one at the frontal bone and one at the occipital bone. Then increasing pressure was applied, and over the years this gave a flat forehead and a high cranial vault. Many cultures, both before and after the Paracas, even the Incas, carried out brain surgery using rudimentary surgical instruments made of obsidian. The only anesthetic used during these trepanning operations were the hallucinatory effects of the chicha. Normally they operated on fractures and blows to the skull received in battle, and to a lesser extent migraines and other pathologies. The percentage of patients who recovered following the operation was very small. In these samples we can clearly see how the bone grew in those who survived the operation. It is also evident which are those who did not survive. The basic weapons of these peoples were clubs and maces, striated to cause even greater injury. Blows were mainly directed at the head of the enemy, and that is why skull fractures and the subsequent trepanning to treat them were so common. Battles were frequent and cruel in these ancient civilizations. One proof of this is given to us by the Sechin culture, which developed around 1,500 years BC in what is now the coastal province of Casma. The stelae which surround a rectangular stone building tell us of a battle in which victors and vanquished are depicted in a remarkable bas-relief technique. Mutilations of limbs, faces of dead warriors with closed eyes, blood streaming from their heads, backbones. The Sechin had a surprisingly detailed knowledge of the human body. This stela represents the eyes of the defeated. On another we see intestines, parts of a pelvis, bones. Later than the Sechin, the Chavin de Huanta civilization arose and flourished from 1000 BC to 300 AD. It was the most influential in Peru. At the Raimonde Stele, one of the most important finds from this period, we see the anthropomorphic figure of their god of creation with feline and bird-like features. In each hand it holds a staff, the symbol of the power of the Andes. In every corner of Peru we find pyramids and tombs. The country is one enormous archaeological treasure, and experts estimate that only 15% has been discovered. Every day, gangs of huaqueros or grave robbers defile a little more of this world cultural heritage. Each of the cavities we can see in these images corresponds to an ancient tomb desecrated. It looks like a moon landscape. The majority of ancient cultures buried their dead with everything they possessed. Alongside the burial site of an impoverished peasant may well lie that of a powerful landowner who, on this journey into the afterlife, took with him all his gold, turquoise and other precious objects, and it is these which are sought after by collectors all around the world. The grave robbers are poor. They steal out of necessity, running the risk of being arrested. The minimum sentence for raiding an archaeological site is 10 years imprisonment. The sacred site of Sipan stands on a former Mochica cemetery. Often when a new grave is dug, they find a mummy with its treasures of pottery and decorative objects. Here is buried the first grave robber to enter the funeral pyramid of the Lord of Sipan, the most important archaeological find in America in recent decades. His name was Ernil Bernal Samame. A fellow huaquero who entered the pyramid with him tells us the story.
Me and Bernal and another friend, we were the ones that discovered the Lord of Sipan. It was one night when we were looking for work and we didn't find any. We went to Naguaca and Bernal, he dreamt he found treasure, and we went in at night. We started to dig, 8 meters, and we had light so we could see the hole. Then Bernal said, "Look, it's gold. We have to go in and see." We went in to take a look, and there we found the Lord of Sipan. All around there were decorations, a lot of gold, and we went in and carefully we started to take things, kept on looting, but there was real commotion in the village, and Bernal started to throw out soil with gold, and people started to take all these things, the objects, the treasures of Sipan, and everybody went away happy. The next day, we didn't dare go back to the place. We were afraid of the police, who were really keeping guard over the area. Everyone in the village loved Bernal because all his wealth, everything he found, he started to give it to the people of the village. Everyone in Sipan heard that he was dead, and everybody, all the village, cried. He died in his house. They came for him as if he was a dangerous criminal. They were armed, and they started to shoot at every part of the house. Over 250 policemen, and all of them firing at the house. He came out of a corner of the house, and they shot him in cold blood. He was a good man, an honest man, hard-working, and one of the best grave robbers.
Fortunately, they did not reach the chamber of the Lord of Sipan, but they did destroy that of the priest. Entire generations of grave robbers have, since the arrival of the Spanish, systematically destroyed the archaeological remains of Peru. Every day, gangs unearth and ransack yet more ancient treasures, which they then sell to the illegal dealers in antiquities for a few miserable dollars. but enough to feed their families. These objects are made of gold and come from the tomb of the Lord of Sipan. The police seized them from the grave robber Ernil Bernal, and they provided the clue for the archaeologist Walter Alva to discover the extraordinary Moche mausoleum. Hundreds of pyramids remain to be excavated. They look like hills due to the effects of the rain, which, though scarce, deforms them, causing them to blend into the natural landscape. This is the Huaca Rajada, the crack tomb, as the burial complex of the Lord of Sipan is popularly known. Excavations are still going on at this extraordinary find. It is the first time that the burial site of an important Moche nobleman has been discovered intact. This complete series of different interrelated elements, 1,700 years old, represents a decisive advance in the study of this culture.
The discovery of the tomb of the Lord of Sipan sums up all the drama of archaeology in Peru, a country with an extraordinary past, with many monuments and remains of different peoples and cultures which flourished one after another over a period of 3,000 years. Few resources to conserve them, and constant ransacking of these monuments in order to sell to collectors. Sipan is a Moche sanctuary. It was about to be looted at the start of '87 when Peru was going through a very severe crisis. The grave robbers, the gangs of ransackers, looted entire areas, the archaeological sites. It was a scandal. A tomb was raided, some gold objects taken. The police intervened on the 23rd of February of that year and seized some gold objects. I went to the police station one night that summer and was astonished to see 2 or 3 spectacular objects which must have come from an incredibly rich tomb. The next day, I went with the police and we saw that, in effect, a very rich tomb had been looted. The police continued to investigate, and we tried to protect the place, but it would certainly have been destroyed. Almost the entire village, urged on by the traffickers and the professional grave robbers, were coming to the monument to destroy it, to ransack it. We decided urgent action was needed, and after a first dramatic intervention, which meant chasing away the grave robbers and the villagers who had taken possession of the site, we began work on what we considered was an archaeological rescue mission, and which, 6 months later, led us to one of the most fascinating archaeological discoveries in the New World.
Buried in a wooden coffin, the first to be discovered in America, the Lord of Sipan lies surrounded by enormous quantities of gold and silver objects. In the replica, which occupies the place of the original coffin, we can see these ornaments, a reflection of his status as governor. His body is conserved in the Running Museum in Lambayeque. He was buried along with his 3 wives, a warrior, a priest, and a child, and further up in a corner the guardian, his feet cut off to symbolically prevent him from escaping. He was a boy of around 9 years old who, because he was pure, would be able to lead his master into the afterlife. Close by, hundreds of pottery vessels filled with the food they would need in the other world. Everyone considered it an honor to be buried alongside the great Lord. His personal counselor was the last to be buried.
Logically, it was a high-ranking lord. There are jewels, gold ornaments, quality objects, and a wealth of gold, silver, and metalwork that is simply amazing. But we also discovered that these objects and these jewels are special religious symbols that provide us with in-depth knowledge of the Moche world. Up
to now, 12 tombs have been found at this one burial complex. The most important ones are those of the Lord of Sipan, that of the previous governor, who they called the Old Lord, and that of the priest, who in Moche society was second in the hierarchical system, immediately below the governor. Work is carried out meticulously, photographing each new discovery, noting down even the smallest details which could provide information. It is a complex puzzle in which each piece must be fitted into its correct place in order to reconstruct the history of the civilization which flourished here almost 2,000 years ago. Even the adobe bricks, which the grave robbers normally destroy as they ransack, are here classified by groups. People would donate them for the construction of the pyramid, and each family marked them with their own stamp. All the pieces are duly registered.
The poor farmers are encouraged to destroy and loot the tombs of their ancestors by traffickers. The traffickers are the result of an international art market that demands archaeological objects. There are people in the United States and Europe who demand art objects for decorative purposes, or because they love culture, or supposedly love art. What they are promoting is the looting, the destruction, and the mutilation of mankind's history, not only that of Peru. We archaeologists not only recover objects, we recover information, we recover testimonies, we recover the history that will enable us to reconstruct the past of humanity.
Every night, under the cover of darkness, the robbers continue to find treasures, raiding the tombs of the Moche, Chimu, Chancay, Paracas, Nazca. The treasures they unearth are bought for pitiful sums by unscrupulous merchants and sold on the black market. With their rods, they search the ground. They are very experienced, and by sense of touch, they know what lies beneath. But on many occasions, they break and destroy objects of incalculable value. The mummies are pulled out in pieces, and so all the information they could give is lost, and the cloths and funeral canopies are destroyed and left abandoned in the sand. This is a Chancay tomb. We are 1 hour from Lima along the Pan-American Highway. The entire coastal region is like an enormous archaeological treasure with hundreds of thousands of burial sites. The police cannot hope to guard all this territory, and the bands of ransackers are always able to find a way to escape unnoticed. In the course of a year, many grave robbers die, buried alive. At times, the fragile walls of the shafts they dig collapse, entombing them. The mummified bodies were wrapped in cloth decorated with designs. The most interesting are those of the Paracas. This culture, which dates from the first centuries of our era, possessed surprisingly sophisticated textile manufacturing skills. We are leaving the coast and heading east to discover the Chachapoya culture. Little by little, the